Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session today on the evaluation chapter. The evaluation chapter is our second to last chapter in our series of documenting the technical project. So this is accompanying your software artifact which you'll be submitting early June. We've reached the stage of the evaluation chapter, so we're very much near the end. All right, just a little precursor to this chapter as well. So early on, you would have documented the different stages of the development of the software artifact. And at this point, you've reached the evaluation of the software artifact. All right, so let's get into today's session. Now, before we do, I usually have a word for you guys. So a word for today is when you feel like quitting, think about why you started. Now, often at this point, students are probably deciding whether or not they're going to submit the application or whether they're going to submit this assignment or not. But I want to remind you, when you started the program as well, think of how, in terms of your level of interest, how engaged you are, in terms of the promises you probably made to yourself that you're going to complete this, etc. You may have had many hurdles that tell you back in the past. For some of you, some of those hurdles occurred while doing the program. But I really want to encourage you. This is, for most of you, your last module, and you're nearing the end. For many of you, you're just a few weeks away from completing your bachelor's degree. What an achievement it will be as well. So sometimes those waves of feelings of quitting and wanting to stop, etc., may come to your mind, but always remember why you started. All right, so let's get into it. So no one here is a quitter. Good. Now, this chapter today is one of the many chapters we're writing in terms of preparing our technical documentation. We've already completed the earlier chapters, including the introduction, the background research, the legal, social, ethical, professional issues, the risk, the requirements analysis, the design, the implementation, and even the testing of the application. And today we're dealing with the evaluation. After today, we have one more lecture on the conclusion chapter. All right, so let's put this in perspective, right? The evaluation chapter, what is it like? Well, just to draw parallels, the testing and evaluation chapter go hand in hand in that there are a lot of parallels with one versus the other. The testing simply tests the functionality of the application, and the functionality you would have described in your requirements analysis. So chapter 5, your requirements analysis, you would have discussed all the different functional requirements. And in chapter 8, testing, you would have tested each of those to ensure whether the feature was working or not. Now, in the design chapter, you would have listed a series of heuristic, right, that you would be following when you're designing your application. So you followed Nielsen's 10 rules, and for each of the rules, you created a list of things that your application, these are design issues that your application will conform to. So for example, helpful error messages, consistent location of feedback and stuff like that, right? So what the purpose of this software evaluation chapter is basically to ensure that you have conformed to the heuristic. So essentially, you are evaluating your application, going through those heuristics to determine whether or not you fully met those requirements, every one of the screen conformed to it, or you partially did it, meaning only some of the screens, or if it was not implemented at all in your application, right? So that's what we're going to be discussing today in terms of the evaluation. So this might include some evaluation of your software, and if so, you should report on the outcomes of it. Now, in terms of the structure of the chapter, if you look at it, it's very much like the testing chapter. It would include an introduction. Every chapter has an introduction. It will also include the method of evaluation, the evaluation itself, and because the evaluation is where you actually go through for each of the different heuristics, whether it was met or not met, etc. And then you do your heuristic report. The heuristic report is very much like your defects log. It lists any one that was not fully implemented or not implemented, right? So once it was either not implemented or only partially implemented, it will go in the heuristic report. The heuristic report is basically a list of things that you can now work on to ensure that it is fully implemented. And at the end, you do your analysis of results. And in the analysis, you would indicate whether or not, like, let's say there were 100 heuristics that you check. Out of those, there were 80 of them that were fully applied, and 20 were not, etc. And those that were not went to the heuristic report. And of those 20, you were able to fix, let's say 18 out of the 20. The 2 that you weren't able to do, they were not critical and, therefore wouldn't impact the application. Something to that effect. Very similar to what you did in the testing chapter. Okay, so let's get started. So just to run through again the structure, you have the introduction, you'll discuss the method of evaluation, you will then do the actual evaluation of the system, and then you'll do a report of all the defects, and then you'll do a analysis at the end. Okay, good. Now, one thing to note, if there's any chapter that if a word count or whatever, you have to leave out a chapter, this would probably be the chapter that you would leave out if you had to face that task. So if you face the task of having to leave out something, this would likely be the one to leave out. Now, please note, in terms of Ghani and UH, right, the evaluation chapter was a recommendation in the past. However, for Ghani, he would have left it out. So basically, he treated the conclusion chapter as evaluation, but he does it more in terms of a self-evaluation rather than evaluation of the software artifact. All right. So you may not see this chapter in all the sample reports that you have. Okay, so let's get started. So every chapter has an introduction. What goes in the introduction? Well, in your introduction to the chapter, you should state the purpose of this chapter, right? Discuss how important evaluation is in relation to the software development. Then discuss the purpose of the chapter, which is to evaluate the application built. And then you will mention, right, what will be included in this chapter. And what you included in this chapter, you'll find in the structure of the report, which is you will look at the method of evaluation, you will actually conduct a heuristic evaluation, you will provide a heuristic report outlining those that were not fully implemented, and then you'll do an analysis of results, right? So pretty much that is what you'll mention as what you'll be covering in the chapter. So can we provide an example? Of course we can. So if you are writing your introduction, this is what it may look like. Evaluation is an absolutely vital step in the software development process. Releasing applications that contain usability issues will result in more frustrated users, more calls to the support line, as well as customers that stop using your product. The evaluation phase therefore ensures that this forethought about the user's need and goals was or was not accurate. The general goal of most evaluation is to provide useful feedback on a variety of audiences that may include the sponsors, donors, client groups, administrators, staff, and other relevant stakeholders. In this case, it's the academic team at the university. This chapter is not about whether your application works. That was already answered in the testing chapter. But this chapter discusses how well it works, how usable it is. So this chapter focuses on evaluating the usability of the application through the use of a heuristic evaluation. Good. So that's an example of your introduction. Next, we need to discuss the method of evaluation, right? Now, in terms of the method of evaluation, one of the things the university is always interested in as well is to help to understand why you chose certain things, right? So why you choose this option versus another as well. So you may want to discuss that as well, okay? So in terms of the method of evaluation, there are different ways you can evaluate a chapter. Now, you are not using questionnaires, and because many of you are not using ethics approval. Because of that, therefore, you are doing the evaluation yourself. And because you are doing the evaluation, it's almost like you are doing an expert review of your system. And one way to do that is using a heuristic evaluation. So you're going to describe the method of evaluation you'll be using, which what I'm describing here is a heuristic evaluation, right? And why you will be using this method. So you need to justify. Briefly discuss as well the advantage and disadvantage of using this approach also. And that will be helpful because it helps to show that you have made a reasonable decision. You're not just using it for no reason. There is a valid reason for doing so. And the application will be evaluated using the heuristics identified in the design chapter, and they are derived from Nielsen's 10 usability principles. Remember, in the design chapter, we would have looked at Nielsen's 10 principles, and for each of those, we came up with a list of different heuristics as well that we would want the application to conform to. So now here you're doing the evaluation of it. So let's take an example of a heuristic evaluation and what you may include. While there are several methods of evaluating a software, the one used for this application will be a heuristic evaluation being conducted by the student. Although usability.gov recommends that heuristic evaluation should be done in conjunction with usability testing, the latter, which is testing, requires testing with representative users, which requires ethics approval. Given the potential delays with seeking ethics approval, it was not considered feasible for this project. UX Matters suggests that a limitation of the heuristic evaluation is that it lacks subjectivity and is not possible to measure customer satisfaction. Heuristic evaluation was chosen because it was a quick, cost-effective way of finding usability problems with an interface. It's also formal and objective. The heuristic evaluation used for this project is a checklist that was based on the 10 usability principles derived by Nielsen and Mollick, which were outlined in the design chapter of this report. Good. Now, next, we're ready to conduct the evaluation. Now, in terms of conducting the evaluation, we know that we have the list already from the design chapter, and we're going to use that list. But what are you going to record in the list? So you need to describe now your process of how you're doing the evaluation, right? So yes, you're going to take the list that you have from the design chapter, which is the list of heuristics, but what you're going to do with it. So ideally, what you're going to do for each of those heuristics, you're going to check the system to see if that heuristic was it fully implemented in the system? Was it partially implemented, or was it not implemented? So you'll give each one a score. So when you give it a score of 0, it means it was not implemented at all in your system. 1 means it was partially implemented, means that feature was only implemented in a few screens and not all the screens. And 2 means it was implemented throughout the application, right? Now, in the instance where the heuristic was not implemented or partially implemented, meaning that you had a 0 or 1, these will be recorded in the heuristic report form, which is similar to the defects log in the testing chapter. And each will be given a severity rating to determine the priority, because if you have a lot of them, you need to know which one to focus on. So you give each one a priority rating as well, and that will determine the order in which you will resolve them. Good? All right, so let's take an example. The heuristic evaluation used for this project is a checklist that was based on the 10 usability principles derived from Nielsen and Mollick, which were outlined in the design chapter. For each of the items in the checklist, the evaluation will determine if the heuristic was not implemented, partially implemented, or fully implemented across the entire application. As such, a rating will be used to represent the result, or was used, past tense, was used to represent the results, whereby 0 indicated was not implemented, 1 indicated heuristic was partially implemented, and 2 indicates it was fully implemented. All right. In the instance where the heuristic was not implemented or partially implemented, the full details was recorded in the heuristic report form and given a severity rating, which determines the priority of each item. Table 18 below shows the results of evaluating the system using Nielsen's first principle, which is visibility of system status. Appendix 22 has a full heuristic evaluation which utilizes all the 10 principles. So you simply include in the main body just one of the principle, right? So this is the checklist here. So for example, 1.1, the heuristic is, does every display begin with a title or header that describes the screen content? And the rating here is partially implemented. What this means is that this feature where every screen begins with a title or header may not have been done throughout the entire application, which is why you give it a partially implemented status, right? Now note, anything that is either gets a 0 or 1 will go to the heuristic form, which is your defects log, right? Okay. 1.2 is there consistent icon design and stylistic treatment across the system. 2, fully implemented means it was implemented on every screen. And so you go on for each and every one of them. So this is heuristic 1, and the same thing you'll do with heuristic 2, etc. Right? Now, this is one way of doing it where you do one at a time. So each heuristic. Another option you could do, right, is for the given heuristic, right, what you do instead here is for the heuristic, you actually list where each screen now, whether it was implemented or not in the screen. So if you look at it here, the reason why 1.1 was partially implemented because it was fully implemented in the home screen in the product detail in the artefact, but it was not implemented in the view card screen. And for this reason, it was considered as partially implemented. This to me is a preferred approach, but the challenge with this is that you have so many screens, you'll have a big matrix and right, that's the only thing, but it's easy to see exactly which screen didn't conform. All right, but this is preferred approach, or you could use a simpler approach here and you just put partial implemented, but you'll need to know which screen you have to go to in order to fix this, right, to resolve this here. All right, so you do the same for each of the different, you do the same as well for each of the different features, right? So there are 10 heuristics, you do the same for the 10 heuristic. All right, so notice student, ideally, you would need to repeat heuristic evaluation using the checklist for each of the 10 principles. And you're not going to put all in the main body. So recommendation, maybe put 1, maximum 2 in the main body, but the appendix should have the full list of the heuristic evaluation done, right? So the following slides I used to reiterate the checklist as you may use. Ideally, it's the same checklist from the design chapter, right? So this is an example. So visibility, match between system, etc. So each of these, you put a rating to it, right? So this was from the design chapter, and there are 10 heuristics. So these are the ones that you're using. Once you finish that now, you need you would have the log. The log basically is your heuristic report. And the heuristic report is used to log each non-conformance, right? So anything that was either that got a 0 or 1, 0 means it was not implemented, 1 means partial implemented, goes in heuristic report, all right? And then when it goes in heuristic report, now if that report gets very large, how do you know which one to prioritize? So what you will do next, you will give a severity rating, right? Which will be a guide in terms of the priority of the item, right? So let's take a look at what you can write for your heuristic report, which is section 9.4. A heuristic report is used to log each nonconformance from the heuristic evaluation. A non-conforming item is one that receives a 0, meaning it was not implemented, or 1, meaning it was partially implemented in the heuristic evaluation. The intention is to track each area where the application has failed to meet the heuristic so that it can be rectified. Each entry in the log is given a severity rating, which is a guide to how the nonconformance will impact the system, and it will be used as a priority list for fixing the log. So in terms of the priority, right, the severity rating is used to determine the likely impact of a usability problem, and this was determined using a combination of 3 factors. So how do you determine the level of severity? Well, you look at 1, the frequency, how often does this problem occur? 2, you look at the level of impact. Will it be easy or difficult for users to overcome this problem? And the third one is persistence. Is it once in a while the problem occurs, or will users be repeatedly bothered with this problem? And based on these, a severity rating scale was used to determine using the values 0 to 4, where 0 represents cosmetic issues, which should only be given which should only be fixed if time allow, while 4 represents a catastrophic issue that must be fixed urgently, right? So given that's the case now, these are the rating, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 0 implies I don't agree, this is a problem. 1 is cosmetic, 2 is minor, 3 is major, and 4 is catastrophe, right? So you give each one a rating, and then based on that now, right? So this is how you can write it up. The following shows the heuristic report. At the end of the heuristic evaluation, there were 15 items logged, of which 10 were partially implemented and 5 were not implemented. See table 18 for the heuristic report. So this is the heuristic report. And for each one, notice here, 1.1 wasn't implemented properly. The problem where it occurs is in the view card page. It has a severity rating of 2 out of 4. Now the comment now is if you're able to resolve the problem or not. So in your comment here, a title view card was added to the page and the problem resolved. So therefore this was fixed. In another problem was 2.1, icons concrete and familiar. We had the remove from cart icon was not a familiar icon. So we replaced this with a familiar looking one. So this was also resolved. So for each of them, apart from giving it a rating, you can put a comment that determines whether or not you're able to resolve the issue or not, right? And then finally, you get to the analysis of results. And the analysis is very much like the analysis for testing. You're simply indicating how many tests were done, how many were successful, how many went in the heuristic report, Those are the ones with defects. And of those, how many you were able to fix and how many you weren't able to fix. And if it will be a problem if these remain, unresolved. Good. So for example, the results were summarized, and from each of the evaluation reviewed, each of the evaluation review carried out, the results suggest that 45 of the 60 checklist items were fully implemented. There were 10 items which were partially implemented and 5 which were not implemented. Both sets were recorded in the heuristic report that was used for recording the violation to the heuristic evaluation. 12 of these 15 were corrected. The remaining 3 defects were not corrected because of insufficient time available. However, these defects were of low severity and therefore do not pose a threat to the system, right? Or to the usability of the system. And that is the last part of it. And that's the analysis of result. And that brings us now to the end of our chapter, right? So based on this, sorry, let me just continue with the sharing here. My apologies. So that brings us to the end of this chapter, which is the evaluation chapter. Any questions, comments, concerns, or anything, guys? I know you would have joined in a bit late as well.
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay, Camille. It's always great having you. All right.
Yeah, I had to work today.
Session. So I recorded the session and I will be sharing it with you guys a bit afterwards, right?
Okay.
No problem. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to end the recording as well now, right? And we can also talk after the recording. Good?